This is IBN, the Islamic Broadcasting Network. The following program is sponsored by the Islamic Media Foundation, sharing the guidance of Allah through broadcast media and the Internet.
God is the light, God is the light. How great the wonder of the heavens and the timeless beauty of the night. How great, then how great the Creator. And its stars like priceless jewels, far beyond the reach of kings. Bow down for the shepherd guiding him home.
This is From Darkness to Light.
But how many eyes are closed to the wonder of this night?
With your host, Harun
Like
Chambel.
pearls hidden deep beneath a dark stream of desires, but like dreams vanish with the call to prayer, and the dawn extinguishes night. Here too are signs. God is the light, God is the light.
Welcome to another episode of From Darkness to Light. I'm your host, Harun Chambel of the Islamic Broadcasting Network. Today we have another interesting story from a convert to Islam. So we're here today with Sister Nancy, who's been Muslim for some 10 years now. And without any further ado, I'd like to go ahead and just turn the mic over to her and let her begin by telling us a bit about her background, where she grew up, and her religious beliefs and so forth and so on. So without any further ado, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome, and we're happy to have you here.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and jazakallah khair for having me.
Wa iyaakum.
I've been blessed to be Muslim now for about 10 years, and it was, as they say, a long and winding road. I grew up in southwest Oklahoma, about as far as a bastion of Islamic culture as one could imagine. I was a military brat. My father was in the United States Army, and my mother is from Germany. One of two girls. I was the younger of the two, and I grew up in a really typical fashion. We had a very moral household, but not at all a religious one. We didn't practice or go to any particular church. My mother at the time was pretty much a non-practicing Catholic, my father a non-practicing Baptist, so there wasn't any type of religious conflict or guidance in the home. But as I said, it was very morally correct and fairly strict. Yes, sir, yes, ma'am, and don't lie, don't steal, don't cheat, all of that. So I was very blessed to have two supportive, present parents for my childhood. And as I said, I just lived a fairly typical life. I went to public school and participated in all the things that kids do, played kickball and football and baseball and all these things. And I would say, even by the time I was a preteen, I remember I would be going to different churches in my neighborhood with some of the kids that I went to school with, because I knew there was something that I was looking for. And the options are fairly limited down there. It's Baptist, Southern Baptist, or Missionary Baptist. And once I went to these different places and I wasn't really satisfied with what I saw, I kind of put it on the back burner for a while. And, life goes on. You do what you need to do as you're growing up, going to high school. You get a job, you get out in the workforce, and your life is, you get up, you go to work, you come home, you watch whatever sitcom happens to be on TV. And on the weekends, you go get in your car and, go out to the lake, and that's it. That's life, and there was nothing much to it. And also being in a military town of Oklahoma, it just wasn't that much available there. So I spent quite a few forgetful years until my early 20s, not really thinking about God, not really concerning myself with it because I was too much caught up in this dunya, in this worldly life. And then at one point, after a pretty traumatic episode in my life, I started searching for God again actively. I started reading the Bible, the Old and the New Testament, and it was really the first time I had read the New Testament, and the concept of Jesus really appealed to me, because the dichotomy with Christianity is that the God of the Old Testament is seen as very forbidding and very stern and very, go kill those people in the land and take over, and then Jesus is seen as love and kindness and all these things that we want, and forgiveness. And so I thought, well, maybe if I called myself a Christian, then I could really get into this love part. But ultimately, I wasn't really comfortable with it. There were just too many things wrong with the concept of original sin. As I said, the dichotomy between God and Jesus. How could God be so mean and Jesus be so nice? And so even though I did study and read on my own, I didn't go to any other churches, and I had fallen away from my religious studies until I met this man who came into my restaurant where I worked, and I noticed he had the little seat that the Jews wear hanging from his clothes, and he had on a kippah and the regalia of an Orthodox Jew, and he had mentioned that we needed to get a new person to fix our air conditioning because he was going to be leaving and going to Israel. And for some reason, I realized I needed to talk to this man. I said, I didn't help but overhear, you said you're going to Israel? And he stopped and he said, yeah, my name is such and such and so. Ultimately, we had a conversation, and I ended up going to his house, and he started teaching me the Hebrew language. And I think there were 7 Jews in Lawton, Oklahoma, where I was at this time. And he started teaching me the Hebrew language, introduced me to his wife and family. And I was really caught up in the fact of, not having to think of Jesus as God, which was something I always had trouble with. And I figured and hoped that my questions on a lot of the issues with the Old Testament or the Torah would be answers as I went along. So I studied with him, 3 or 4 months, and then at that time I was able to come to Kansas City where my mother lived. She came and got me and rescued me from Oklahoma. And I continued to study Judaism. I didn't just study Judaism, however. I studied Judaism with the Hasidic Lubavitcher Jews. These are the ultra-Orthodox. Perhaps you're familiar with them, wearing the black coats and the black hats and the side curls. Very Orthodox and somewhat out of place in Kansas City, but they were very activist. And they were teaching people that you didn't have to become a Jew. You could be what's called a B'nai Noach. If you keep the 7 Noachite commandments, which are 7 of the 10 commandments, which I can't remember which ones you didn't have to keep that they did. But then you could be a righteous person, a righteous goy. And I studied, and I thought, that's not enough for me. I want to go the whole way with this. And I really was studying Judaism. And I spent my Sabbaths with them and their family. But although I was enjoying the fellowship and the friendships that I made, my questions were not being answered. Why was Moses considered disobedient because he struck the rock instead of speaking to it? Why am I supposed to believe that prophets of God did horrible sins and things which we can read in the Old Testament? I won't really go into details because actually it's quite distasteful, and I don't even like saying the words on my lips. But to accuse a prophet of idol worship and of adultery and murder is a pretty serious thing. And anyone who is any sort of a student of the Bible would know, to whom I'm referring. And so after a couple of years of studying this, I kind of fell away. And it was just a repetition of my childhood where I just kind of put God on the back burner because I was just confused and I wasn't happy with what I was finding. And as it happens, I jogged in the little community where I lived. And every day I would go in to get my newspaper and something to drink from the local convenience store. And I started talking to the people who worked there who happened to be Pakistani Muslims. And, we had spirited discussions over the counter over the virtues of Islam versus Judaism. And at the time, I was pretty firm in my faith, I thought, even though I was drifting away from the community. So it was quite a spirited debate. And ultimately, I said, I want to know what these alien people with this really strange religion are talking about. So I went and got myself a Quran, and that was the beginning, so to speak.
Okay, we're going to take a break for a few brief messages. Please don't change that dial. You're listening to From Darkness to Light. I'm your host, Harun Chambel of the Islamic Broadcasting Network.
Ghiyath-ud-Din Omar al-Khayyam was born at Nishapur in the provincial capital of Khurasan at around 1044 AD. Omar Khayyam was an astronomer, mathematician, a philosopher, physician, and a poet. He was educated in Nishapur and Samarkand when he was young and was a contemporary of At-Tusi. He also contributed to algebra. Khayyam wrote a book called Maqalat fil Jabr wal Muqabila. He wrote other books also in the fields of science. Khayyam was a very famous poet and most famous today for his book Ar-Rubaiyat, or quatrains. Omar Khayyam died in the year 1123 AD at 79 years old. This has been a minute of Muslim civilization from IBN.
The following is NBA star Hakeem Olajuwon.
If we live within the boundaries of one race, one culture, one way of doing things, we limit our ability to understand the wisdom we can learn from each other. Our ethnic and cultural diversity is a blessing that teaches us that it doesn't matter what the color of your skin is. It's the goodness in your heart that makes the difference.
This message is brought to you by your American Muslim neighbors.
This public service announcement is brought to you by the Islamic Media Foundation.
The beauty of the earth and the creatures who dwell on her. How great, then how great, the Creator.
Welcome back. You're listening to From Darkness to Light. I'm your host, Harun Chambel of the Islamic Broadcasting Network. We've been here with Sister Nancy, and she's been telling us about her interesting story of how she came to Islam. In our first segment, we ended by Sister Nancy coming across some Pakistani Muslims that she began to dialogue with about Islam and Judaism. And I would like to start off from that point and ask you how, when you first got a Quran, what were the first type of things that came across to you in your mind, in your heart, as you were reading? How did it conflict with the previous religions you had studied, specifically with Judaism and perhaps with the New Testament studies of Christianity and so forth? How did they conflict? How did they compare? And how did it affect your heart when you began to read it?
Well, it affected my mind and my heart at the same time. And I say that because I tend to be kind of a logical person. I like to understand reasoning behind things. And then you learn these lessons. It takes a while for what you learn in a book to be inscribed on your heart. So initially it appealed to me for the logic of the religion. So I saw in Islam I could dispense with original sin. I could dispense with the fact that Eve was given primary responsibility for causing the fall of mankind, and assume my position as an equal with a man. Although we have different roles, we are equal in the sight of God, and I was no longer this cursed creature who was merely here as a source of temptation for man, which in a lot of the fundamentalist religions, that's exactly what they taught. There's a quote from the Bible, and I don't want to take things out of context, but there's a quote saying it's better to marry than burn, which is not exactly a ringing endorsement of marital bliss.
Quality.
So these are the things that I really had a problem with. And ultimately, it was the simplicity of the message and the fact that it was a reconciliation of the true aspects, that I knew there were truthful aspects of Judaism and Christianity. They weren't totally false. Islam reconciled the differences. I was able to dispense with the things and finally get an answer to my questions. I no longer had to deify Jesus, and I didn't like the smarmy, saccharine, sweet, Jesus is your loving, Jesus loves me, this I know, this I never could handle. I wanted to put Jesus in his proper perspective, and I was able to with Islam as a beloved human prophet of God, one in the long line of prophets, and one who did his job very well. Therefore, I didn't have to deify him as the Christians did, or throw him out as the Jews did, and accuse his mother of base crimes. So that's how it appealed to me logically, was being able to meet Jesus, peace be upon him, finally. And then, of course, the more I learned about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the fact that he lived in the full light of history. There is no mystery associated with him. No one speaks in tongues. No one has to tell me that 1 + 1 + 1 = 1. And we know through the living record of his companions and the companions of the companions and those who followed them in an unbroken record, what he said, how he lived, what he ate, how he taught, without doubt, without fear of contradiction. I know that he walked and he stepped into a room with his right foot first and he ate with his right hand, because these are the details of daily life that came to us from the respected people who lived with him day by day. Whereas in Christianity, we were supposed to follow Paul, who did not ever meet Jesus, who had a vision on the road to Damascus, and whose daily teachings contradicted those of the apostles who lived, eat, breathed, slept, and prayed with Jesus, peace be upon him, on a daily basis.
Right.
So that was where it appealed to me logically. I didn't, there's certainly mystery in Islam, mystery and beauty and poetry and things that are more esoteric, which I tend to be a very logical person, so I don't really go there because I consider myself a baby in the religion. But the logic appeals to me, and it has to appeal to my mind, my heart, and my soul. And Islam did, whereas I never got answers to my questions, and I always knew there was something missing from Judaism and Christianity.
It's interesting that you mentioned the point you made about how there was no mystery about Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his life, because it's well documented. In the same light, something that I can relate to in my journey to Islam, that for me, also the concept of the oneness of God in Islam was extremely clear. There was no mystery about it. And that was something to me, like growing up and having issues with the Trinity in terms of how it makes sense, how it's supposed to work, how you can have an all-encompassing creator and at the same time, one of his creation, albeit, a prophet and messenger of God, and one who was a pure person and things like this, like Jesus, now saying that he's like part of God, and that it doesn't make sense how you can be perfect and imperfect at the same time, how you can be creator and creation at the same time. And for me, like, it's, Islam cleared all of that up. It's very clear. It's just God is the creator and everything else in existence is his creation. And there's no mystery about it. So now an individual is just left with the issue of reflecting and thinking and pondering on these issues and thinking about their own creation and realizing, either this is the truth or it's not. There's no issue about mystery, and you don't have to kind of just say, well, I just believe kind of thing. So getting back to your story, so now that you've read the Quran, it started to have this kind of impact on your life. You started to feel a bit more relaxed in terms of these concepts that you said you were struggling with from the Old and New Testament. What now happened with you? I mean, because we've talked a lot about from the religious perspective, but also from the point of view of, being an American, being raised in this culture and things like this, Islam is still something that to Americans is extremely foreign. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to kind of touch on perhaps like the emotional aspects of it and how you dealt with your own self and, allowing the religion to grow on you.
Well, I think from an aspect of instituting Islam in my own life, my mother raised me to be confident in when I see something is right, I do it, and I don't sit around waiting for the approval of her, because, she's not Muslim, so she has a different perspective than I do, right. And we respect each other's differences, but she's completely, totally supportive. So she taught me, this is what you believe and this is what you do, and you live according to what you believe. So the social issues of Islam grew on me gradually. By the time I'd already been studying Judaism quite for a long time, so I'd already modified my dress, wearing more modest clothing. I had stopped eating pork. I had stopped going out and socializing in the typical Western way. It's like Allah prepared me in steps to be able to accept the message of Islam. If I had heard of Islam in Oklahoma, I would not have been ready to accept it. I was not there yet.
Right.
But by introducing me to the elements of Tawheed that are strong in Judaism, right. After all, their declaration of faith is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God, the Lord is one.
Right.
I evolved to the point where when Allah sent me people to teach me Islam, I was ready to hear it.
Right.
And so, of course, the first big thing I did was check out all the books by Muslim authors in the library, which was not horribly large, but I did. Fundamentals of Islam, the basic books, and how to pray, and how to do this, why Muslims do what they do, and how they believe.
Right.
Then the next big step is go to the Islamic Center. And
right.
That's the terrifying thing, because you're walking in there. I don't care how many friends you have who are Muslim. It is an alien environment.
Right.
And so one day I walked in the door, and this little whirlwind tornado of energy, whom I will name, Marvet Ibrahim, mashallah, Allahu Akbar, a tiny little Egyptian lady, took me in, literally stepped up and got out of the study circle, took me in and sat me down beside her and enveloped me with an unconditional love that is still strong to this day.
MashaAllah.
And she helped get me in that circle and would not let me go. And the ladies whom I met would not let me go. And they would telephone me and make sure I would come. And a Malaysian sister gave me my first Quran and my first hijab. And a Syrian sister taught me Surah Al-Fatiha. And the Imam of the Masjid witnessed my Shahada eventually. And so I have been influenced by people from every country in the world. And I specifically like to mention that because unfortunately we do get into our little cliques and groups.
Right.
But I have been influenced by white, black, brown, red, every shade and ethnic group from the planet in my journey to Islam. And that's what's so beautiful about it.
MashaAllah. Okay, we're going to step away for a few brief messages. You're listening to From Darkness to Light. I'm your host, Harun Chambel of the Islamic Broadcasting Network. Please stay tuned.
IBN is your voice. Let us know what you think of our broadcast. Email us at feedback@ibn.net or call our feedback line at 703-241-9659, extension 6. Your opinion counts.
Sponsor a program on the Islamic Broadcasting Network, IBN. Expose your organization or business name to the listeners of IBN in the Washington, D.C. metro area and nationwide and worldwide through our live internet broadcast. Support IBN Dawah efforts. Make the call and sponsor a program today. Get your name into thousands of homes nationwide and worldwide. For more information, call IBN at 703-241-9659.
Above the lives of men, weeping rivers for thousands of years. But how many hearts are closed to the wonders of this sight?
Welcome back. You're listening to From Darkness to Light. I'm your host, Harun Chambel of the Islamic Broadcasting Network. We've been here today with Sister Nancy, and she's been telling us about her journey to Islam. In this last segment, I would like to perhaps have you discuss with us what you believe is the greatest challenge that you have faced since becoming a Muslim and embracing Islam, and what sort of exercises or practices within the faith that you have tried to do to overcome this struggle, this issue, and to get victory over it. So, please, Bismillah.
Well, I think the biggest struggle, of course, is the same struggle we all go through, and that's the struggle, the jihad an-nafs, the struggle with our own base instincts and our own base desires. And for me, I would say the biggest struggle is the daily discipline of prayer, of salah. I learned about the fundamentals of the faith, and I accept them wholeheartedly. I wear the scarf, the hijab, I cover with no difficulty. It's something that Allah has blessed me with, that I have not had any challenges. But the daily discipline of the salah, learning it correctly, praying it at the correct times, praying with the khushu', with the sincerity and the concentration. And I think this is a big thing for a lot of reverts to Islam, simply because, number one, we're praying in a tongue that is not necessarily familiar to us, although I'm blessed to have learned enough Arabic that, I know what I'm saying when I pray. Right. It's unfamiliar to us. We're not used to taking this time out of our daily routine. And some of us are just more organized than others, and I'm not one of those horribly organized persons, so it has been a daily struggle. I'm blessed right now with a supportive husband who helps remind me. I'm blessed with a small son for whom I need to be a role model, and seeing him look at me like, Mommy, you make wudu, Mommy, you pray, really helps get me off the couch and onto the masalla.
Right.
Simple things like making sure I have clean prayer clothes available upstairs and downstairs for wherever I happen to be. Make sure I try and keep my wudu. I make my ritual ablution as much as possible so I'm always ready to pray when the moment comes. I have the azan software on my computer so I don't forget when the prayer is. Make sure I try and schedule my errands so that I'm somewhere where I can pray, where it's not, out in the middle of traffic on the Beltway.
Right.
These are my struggles, and I am not perfect, and I'm still struggling with it today after having been Muslim for 10 years. And I know that's a big issue with a lot of people.
So, in terms of the actual salah itself, what kind of things within, because of the struggle that you've been making with it and trying to do the things that you mentioned about being in a state of wudu, being in places where you'll be able to make salah in their proper times, things like this, how have you seen these kind of efforts manifest into results?
Well, I think, number one, success builds upon success.
Right.
And it helps you develop a routine, which some people it just takes longer to develop a routine than others. I'm not a creature of habit.
Right.
The fruits of it, number one, it helps me get out more actually because I make sure I socialize with good, strong sisters so that when we're somewhere at a halaqah or at a potluck or somewhere we're learning, I know we're all going to pray at the same time. So it helps strengthen my social ties with the sisters.
Right.
It helps strengthen my son, who can now, follow along with me as we recite Surah Al-Fatiha.
Yeah.
It has helped my relationship with my husband because we know that we're putting Allah first. And, if you don't do your duty to Allah, you will not do your duty to your spouse. So it's something I take very seriously, and I live in a constant state of guilt when I backslide, which is a good thing because as long as it moves me to correct my actions.
What kind of, in closing, what kind of general advice could you give to our listeners?
If you are a new Muslim or if you are a lifelong Muslim who has not been practicing his or her Islam as you would like to, before you do anything else, get right with Allah. Start now. Even if all you know is Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, you start with that. You get a prayer book. The first and most important thing is to learn the prayer. And if you're a new Muslim sister or a new Muslim brother, don't get married right